the head of community at Camp Network. She has 29 years of experience in community management and loves building amazing communities. Building vibrant, trusting communities is a timeless skill that's, of course, more important than ever. And our next speaker will share lessons from her career in online community management from Usenet and AOL to blockchain and AI, highlighting strategies that have stood the test of time. Please join me in welcoming Rebecca Lowe.
So, Smiling from the Wrist Down is my presentation, and I named it after something that I think is it's kind of unique in a way for to be able to speak to a group of community members like you guys, managers, I'm sorry, like you guys. This is something that we invented way back in the early days before there was even a commercial internet to speak of. AOL had just come online. I was working on a lot of like Usenet and IRC chats at the time as a volunteer. And that was the first, I think, technique that we all started to teach each other was how to deal with terrible situations. And it's something that I keep bringing up to newer community managers, like, let me teach you this one little trick. And so that's the title of this, although it's not entirely the whole thing, but just a little background on that. Like I mentioned, I've been managing communities since 1996, and I became a paid community manager, which was such a crazy thing at the time in 98. So I've really kind of been around for a little bit of time doing various types of communities. Or most of the verticals I've worked in have been either entertainment industry or financial industry. Um, as a person who just loves learning, it's been an incredible experience to create and meet just untold amount of people around the world, work with some of the biggest brands on the planet, but also the smallest startups in the world. I also have had some really incredible highlights in my career, like the first time that a piece of television was ever created from what people were saying online, I was directly involved. I was actually the producer in charge, which is an amazing thing to look back on and realize that's how I started my career. But oddly enough, the more things change, the more they stay the same. That's kind of how that things ended up. Whenever I look at like the stripe with all the information on the bottom of the screen, I was part of the team that built the first one of those. So I've kind of been around and adjacent to a few really interesting things. So even things like I put on here social financial trading, people talking about their trades. We worked on that and we actually put that out Ally Invest. Um, and then the market crashed. And it was definitely not causative, but it was so interesting. So I feel like I've just been a bystander managing communities, having people talk to a lot of history, particularly of the internet. And then the last few years, I'd kind of stepped away. Was a community manager full time for a big giant gaming property. It was Star Trek in its 50th anniversary year. It was just a lot. And so I stepped away and kind of went towards to customer experience skills. And particularly now, you have to have a good grounding in both to be a great community manager. So I feel really awesome that I got the opportunity to talk to disgruntled customers and not just create communities. I feel like I've gotten a pretty holistic view over time. And so in the last 5 years, I've mostly been working in blockchain and Web3. I've worked for some successes, I've worked for some failures. I did work for FTX. That was a pretty crazy time, and it keeps getting crazier as far as I'm concerned. But that was also, again, I learned a lot there, and I continue to learn about how to manage communities, how to manage what we currently have, which is communities of FOMO. AI communities are very similar in this way as well. So without further ado, I've kind of been all over the map in terms of the people I've met, the communities I've built, but some things have remained kind of universally true. And to give kind of a quick overview for those of you that might not have been around for the first one, the web one is basically the internet had been academic, it became commercial, AOL and and local dial-up and all those things before the advent of broadband really was the first sort of stab at folks being able to find each other and for information online and make communities. Very first community I ever found was a Star Trek forum. I was a big nerd. I was super happy about it. Then when I became a parent, I was able to find that community of purpose on AOL, which it felt like something for everybody. And at the time, it was so new. So many things were happening that nobody had really done before that we made a playbook, and AOL used that playbook, and that playbook continues to be in use of communities really of purpose. Um, but it was an exciting time, and there was a lot of challenges. There were a lot of things that went wrong, but there are also a lot of things that went right. Using in your toolkit to this day. Web 2, Web 1 kind of started to die right about the time that um, there was a crash. I think you've probably heard about it. 2000, 2001, 2002, big crash. And for a little while, it wasn't really obvious how communities were going to go. There had been some stronger ways to collaborate. I mean, everybody remembers AOL Instant Messenger. Even if you didn't have that, you'd be able to do that. But two different technologies sort of merged to make Web 2. The first one is access to broadband. The second one is access to mobile. So Twitter and Facebook burst on the scene in the late 2000s, 2007, 2008. People were starting to pick up Twitter. They were starting to get smartphones. And social networks became essentially another platform for community, but one that was very different in the sense that there was such a thing as a like, there was such a thing as virality, and then there was such a thing as the owners of these companies, still walled gardens for the most part, being able to use the data, things you like, places where you engage, to then really target you with ads. And there's been a lot of, I think, ink spilled, and I won't go into it here about whether or not this was good or bad, but ultimately, it's people were engaging again. And in fact, whole brands and whole creator networks were built on top of Web 2 to both make those communities happen. Creator communities, the rise of creator communities obviously is part of this, but there's challenges as well. I think that, most people look around the world more connected than ever. We hear that more people are lonelier than ever. It's a good social experiment. But in the last few years in particular, we've seen Web3 emerge. It's really not. I almost feel like it's a back to basics kind of thing. The communities are decentralized. They're on their own servers. It might be like, let's say, on Discord, but it's a Discord server that you own and you do, and kind of going all the way back using technology to create those communities. It's felt very familiar and actually very exciting because there's a lot of FOMO. There's a lot of people joining these communities. They want to be on the cutting edge. They want to know what's next. And so that emerging sort of community paradigm on different platforms, particularly Discord, Telegram, places like that, has been really interesting. It's been particularly fascinating around like social events. What's going on with the war? People who are in a war zone. My community right now, for example, has people from all over the world. I'm able to check in on these people that are coming together to get away from it all, to just talk about tech and that kind of thing and get away from some of the horribleness of their daily lives. Ukraine, Russia, Israel, Palestine, those people have a safe place. And it's safety that I kind of wish to speak about with you guys, because it's one thing that I think that we lost a little bit in the age of Web 2, but I feel like ever, it's time to kind of bring that back and help people feel like they have a good place, a place to smile, a place to actually be a part. So smiling from the wrist down, as I mentioned, we coined that kind of in AOL chat room days, although I think it might be an earlier thing, but it's something that's very basic to community management, but is also a really powerful tool. At the time, we were handling a lot of tough new situations. There weren't a lot of laws. There were children in chat rooms. There was all of these things, people trading pictures. Nobody was on top of it yet. There really wasn't anything. And so when there were disturbances, when there were things that we had to deal with back then, sometimes we were winging it. And AOL did a really good job of recognizing very quickly that trust and safety measures would be key to their walled garden and the communities that they had. So two techniques. One is using tools, which, might be kicking people out, muting them, all the ones that you think about, but also the technique of watching this, these kinds of things unfold, these people fighting, people sending bad pictures back and forth, all of these things, and making a determination about how bad it is, right? If it's somebody sending CSAM, obviously it's not something that you would allow, but if it's two people in a fight, learning how to moderate that fight, learning how to make those people who are angry or frustrated or butting heads actually come around and then become even deeper participants in your ecosystem, in your community, because they like how you got them to behave correctly and then modeled that behavior. And so that's what smiling from the wrist down basically is the art of being able to turn bad situations into sticky situations. And off and on we've seen it, but a lot of the time people think that moderation is, you know, it's either engagement or it's safety or it's this, and people have tended to be siloed, particularly in the Web 2 era. But I found that, like, my current community, I actually joined Camp Network and built the community starting in April. We're at 20,000 Discord members, and we've got a bunch of other vanity statistics. But the thing that I really enjoyed about it was that we took this and we went all the way back to basics, and we haven't had to ban almost nobody because we invested in safety. And this is one of those things that I feel like might have gotten lost in the past. That is now I'm seeing a lot of communities don't make their users safe, and then people their attention is divided. The AOL is used to have all of this. Now there's lots of people competing for that mind share. So the back to basics approach is a little bit new in some ways and old in some ways. And I'll kind of talk a little bit more about that as I go on. I don't want to take too much time though. So just very quickly, creating safety. This is the challenge that hasn't changed. Safety and friendliness apply to virtual spaces. Often, all we see is screaming and yelling on social media, people fighting. And there are most of those communities where you see them are self-moderated, or they're content communities, or you see people who are angry and they're railing at a brand for making a decision. But there's a lot of anger, and in fact, social media does kind of thrive on that. And we found that when we're creating Discord communities or communities on Reddit, a little bit on those particular kinds of spaces, the safe ones, the ones that have the best moderation, the ones that have people that are engaging every day, that have a face of the community, somebody that you can tag when you're in trouble and need help. That actually have been the communities that I've seen that have been really sticky. So taking that and saying the marketing team does not have to do all this work, it should not be on them. They're the ones that are putting the content out, they're the ones that are creating these experiences for folks, and decoupling marketing so heavily from community management, where it has been in the Web 2 era, has been kind of an interesting experiment to run again. We've seen brand communities suffer from pushing content and not really engaging support on their social media, and coming all the way back to actually creating real communities that are sticky and that really 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 resonate with people, those must see destinations that people come to every day. That's exactly what I've kind of brought back, particularly to the Web3 space, to see how that would work, because Web3 is rife with all kind. Whenever you have an emerging tech, there's all kinds of people telling you all kinds of, you know, lies about how much money you're going to make, or they're trying to snipe your money, or, scam you or whatever. And so trust and safety has been, to the last three communities that I've worked on, has been the one thing that I've put in to help them flourish. And it's been amazing. Like, you put in the tools, invest in technology to keep those spaces. For example, I use Hashbot, I use Goodnight, I use a couple of other things to make sure that people stay safe, that nobody can impersonate us, nobody can hack our accounts, and that we see bad actors before. We have many, many ways to see bad actors before they can become a bad actor. Hashbot in particular on Discord is great at this, at scanning, the time people have been around, if they have similar, anyway, you kind of get the picture. But that technology makes it easier for me to do the second part. I won't depend on it totally. And I do find that some of the communities in my spaces will often just depend on that and not really take a look at their membership as they come in. And the first time they hear of a problem is when somebody says, "Hey, I was scammed," or, "Hey, somebody sent me nude pictures," or those kinds of things. So one of the things that was the first thing I did whenever I took this particular network and started building its community, was put in some hard guidelines about who could join, in terms of their account age, and then really making sure that I know them as well as I can for an anonymous forum. And actually, I really accomplished that piece of it by being omnipresent, being that community leader that people wanted to ask questions of and follow. spending tons of time at it. And I'll talk about that in a minute, but these are things that are actually like super, super crucial that, again, we've lost, is that personal face of community management. And like I mentioned before, giving somebody, a place to run. So technology is important, but people are just as important, and rules are just as important as well. Some communities, particularly in Web3, suffer from not really posting rules or just saying, hey, don't be mean to one another, but without any teeth to it. The problem, it actually nearly destroyed a community that I came in and resurrected for OpenSea. Just that whole not really having enough, actual humans, not really clear rules, not really a clear reason for being. And then also just the judiciousness of it. Like, I'm not going to kick somebody out for being rude. I'm going to spend the time to smile from the wrist down to turn that situation around if I can. And that's something that I teach all my moderators. I have an incredible crew of both volunteer and paid moderators and managers that have really helped me grow this community into one that is so highly engaged that it's crazy. People show up every day. They're excited to talk. We play poker in the morning. Like, those kinds of things have really, really, really made people feel safe because they know I'm there. They know that our team is there, and we train, we engage. We're always talking about, yes, I know this person said something upsetting. It really wasn't against our rules. Let's just talk to them and make sure that they don't do that. It seems really simple, but in the age of social media, a lot of this was lost, and it was beyond time to bring it back. And that's really this. That I did say this. The face of community is you. And, even with creator communities on Instagram and some of the other sort of creator communities, there is a sense of, I don't know, I think the word is probably disengagement from the actual people in the community, and it's all around a cult of personality. That's okay, but it's good to have the cult of personality that you're fostering being you as a helpful, engaging, I'm always there for you kind of face. It really worked well, particularly with Web3 communities, is that they're looking for you to model behavior, and your behavior is actually what drives the beauty of the community. If you're constantly just saying, how's your day? Oh my gosh, I read about this thing happening in your town. What's going on? Like, are you okay? These are the whole thing that happened in Bangladesh a couple of weeks ago. Um, we had a community member who's a student, and there was a government crackdown, and we didn't hear from him because they cut off internet in the whole country. This was the kind of thing that showed me that what we were doing was working. Every single day there was a watch for this guy. We were waiting, asking every day, waiting for him, putting together funny memes, putting together a lookbook for when we got him, but obviously very nervous. And then when he appeared, he was so charged by the outpouring of love and support from his Web3 community that he comes to every day to play poker, that he's now become my number one top champion. He is everywhere I need him to be, making memes, getting people into the community. That's the story right there, is the true engagement. And that starts with you as the community lead, the community manager, your team, always being there, always smiling from the wrist down, always making sure that in the midst of chaos they have a place to go. And that's really what this is. Be present. Smiling from the wrist down means you create events, you host them, you do AMAs, you do state of the communities, you actually talk to people like human beings, you listen to what they have to say, you incorporate it into your programming. It all seems very simple when I say it, but in reality, it is actually a very difficult and demanding job. You've got to have good people around you to keep that going. But anyway, so that's sort of what I think here is the being the authentic self is, oddly enough, something that really has been very helpful. Not the oversharingness necessarily of a social media, but just, hey, I've got 3 kids, and one of them's at UMass, and I'm so excited when he graduates. And then they know those data points about me, and that brings them closer to me, especially if they have something else in common with me. And that's all part of smiling from the wrist down. It's hard, it's tough. I've been a community manager when somebody has threatened to come shoot me and actually shown up at a building with a gun. But at the same time, I do think it's made me very successful in this career, and has made me so many friends that I treasure over the years that I've met in communities like this. So that's really it. I've left very few moments for questions, but I would love to engage with you. If you do have questions, I am here for them.
Thanks, Rebecca. I have questions.
Oh, good. I'm here for it.
First of all, thank you for sharing. Your experience is formidable. I think that's the right word. And thank you very much for sharing your story and all of the experiences that you've had. Um, yeah, I have a handful of questions, and for anybody else who has one, you can pop it in the Q&A tab. We'll try to get to them. My first one is, what advice do you have for community managers who are leading global communities who feel pressure to try to stay on top of news everywhere in order to kind of stay up to date for their members? I will just share, a time where I was trying to get a hold of someone, couldn't, was worried because they're a volunteer and they should have shown up, and then later found out, what was happening in like local news there. So, yeah, just would love some advice.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, I will say this, I'm a news junkie anyway. I like to be on top of things. My first thing I do every day is pull up Apple News and start reading, but that's me. And in some communities that I've managed, it's obviously not my job to completely be on top of all global news and also lead teams. So it really, I think, depends on the size of your team. I definitely don't advocate to be everywhere all at once. I definitely don't advocate to be, to overtask yourself. But at the same time, I have found that when you create a trustful community like this, people that are showing up every day and that get that, get that pleasure. I didn't find out about Bangladesh from myself or my own reading. I found out about it from another community member who was another volunteer who said, "Hey, isn't, you Yami is his nickname. Isn't he in Bangladesh? Isn't he a student? What's going on? Have you heard from him?" And then we all together read the news and we were horrified and we started posting messages and figuring out how to make that together. And so you can't stay on top of all global news every day. But at the same time, if you have that kind of community, they're going to bring that. It's been wild how many people, like the Ukrainians and Russians, are friends, for example, in my community. They worry about each other, they talk to each other. We've created a safe space for them to feel like they can be together and still talk about what's going on in their daily lives without actually like talking about the war, but it does come up. And, to your point, in my experience at least, if you're creating a trustful community, they already know to come to you and say, "Hey, have you heard from, or did you read this? Do you think that there was a, I think you guys might have heard this. If you haven't, there was this morning, there was a bus that was hijacked in LA. One of our community managers in LA, I had 5 people fly into Discord and go, "He's okay, right? He's okay." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And I was able to find out. But that just shows how much trust people have. They like us and we like them. And that authenticity is why we're able to be there for with another, and why, if you think of the 99-1 rule, I've got kind of about 8% daily people in there engaging, not 1%, but creating content and that kind of thing, which is pretty astonishing in community of FOMO. But I love it. And so that's like, they depend on me, I depend on them, and that has created a really, really, really sticky community.
Yeah, that's wonderful. It leads me into another thought of like, where do you draw the line? Because I think for a lot of our attendees, including myself, running a brand community that is professional, it's for work, it's obviously we have fun, we share memes when it's appropriate for work. But like, where do you draw that line of the, I guess, like personal storytelling and like that friendship building that's not necessarily work related? I don't know if that's a well thought out
Yeah.
thought.
No, I completely understand your question, and it's funny because it's evolved over the years, right? I mean, I think on AOL, people are content to live behind screen names and not share any part of themselves, which, until they got to know people better, which I think, that was the way it was. We were encouraged to be anonymous. Chat hosts didn't use their real, like, this was something where there was such a gap between those things. And so one of the things that I did, I worked at a company called Moms Online that was acquired by Oxygen. One of the things I did at that point when I was a senior producer of Community was just like, I would go to speaking events like this. I would do those kinds of things to make sure that they knew I was real. But the flip side of that is, yeah, like I mentioned at the History Channel, when they switched programming from mostly documentaries to mostly reality, we had threats all the time and people coming to our building in New York ready to shoot things up because of us. So there's a delicate balance. And I don't think there's any real answer. I think it really depends on your community to actually answer that. The community that I have right now, are by definition anonymous. I mean, people who are doing things on blockchains, they've got wallets and everything. But my product is actually about reducing anonymity and being able to bundle yourself into a digital identity that you own and can monetize by connecting your Web2 socials to, the blockchain address that you're doing. And some of that is actually letting people see the real you. So I've seen it go in cycles, but I think that it really does depend on the type of community you have and the type of role that you are. Like at the History Channel, it was not surprising to me whatsoever that somebody would threaten to shoot up the building. At even American Express, that wouldn't be, at a bank. But for small communities of purpose, it feels a little different. So I do think it really, really does depend on the type of community you have.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, I have one more question. And this is more about that, like, how do you keep the balance of personal touches and being a human being and being a person? I mean, you mentioned your son who's graduating. So, how do you keep the balance of those personal touches while still protecting your personal life?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't overshare on social media for one thing. So if people go looking for me, they're only going to get the details that I choose to share, which I think that's common to all community professionals. I think we've all realized that oversharing can be bad. So things that are tied to my real life identity typically are very bland. However, I do also share my real life identity in this particular community, and it is a choice, and it's a choice that I'm making consciously that a lot of people don't make, even in the space that I'm in, which is Web3 space. Lots of people prefer to remain anonymous. It feels like AOL all the time. My rationale and my reasoning for being this way is partially brand related. Just the fact that we are a brand that is looking to make your identity on chain be the real you, however you present yourself. But also, I made a choice that I wanted people to get to know me. I wanted people to know I was older. I wanted people to know that I had some experience. I wanted people to know that, this is something that this is who I am. This is where I've worked. These are the things I do. I share quite a bit about that. I answer a lot of questions about it. But I don't necessarily talk about my day to day. Be, speaking about my son graduating, but I'm giving away it. I will say this: if a community starts to feel or weeded out, does that mean that I could never have somebody come after me? It's only happened truly one time, and that was the History Channel in all of the 29 years I've been doing this. So I feel like there's a lot of bluster. Now, if I was in a community where it was absolutely like one of those super polarizing brands, like, if I was the community lead for the New York Times or, one of these things where there's fights going on constantly, that would be a very different experience. And I would want that anonymity. But in the case of a trustful community that's small, a community of purpose like this, I think as much authenticity as you can muster just makes the community stickier. I haven't lost anybody. Like, I mean, sure, I've had people come and go, but like the volunteers, the people that are early adopters, every month we get a few more that come in and they want to learn more about us and they stay largely because I'm willing to share small details of my life. And then they do that too. And next thing you know, we're friends. And I think that's, how we've intentionally built it is how can we become friends? And, it gets talked about a lot because our community is really unique in this space because we all show up, if there's a post on Twitter, we all show up, we start talking about it, we throw those memes, whatever partner we're co-marketing with is like, wow, your community is out of control. How are they so awesome? I don't know the answer to that other than some of these timeless techniques like smiling from the wrist down and being authentic actually really work. And a lot of younger folks, they grew up in just social media. So they don't know what it's like to be in a really sweet community where everybody is looking out for one another and the community's health at all times. So that's really, I think, the best answer I can give for that question. It depends. I hate to say that, but yes, it depends.
I think there's so many it depends answers for the community industry because so much of what we do truly does depend on your community because every community is completely different and every community manager is different and brings something different to the table. So I accept your it depends answer.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us, Rebecca. It was a really real pleasure to have you join us today.
Thank you all for having me. And yeah, appreciate you.